He was a farmer who was not obliged either to sow or reap his harvest, but merely to gather it in. This grave, phlegmatic, and silent individual was called Hans Bielke, and he came recommended by M. Fridriksson. He was our future guide. His manners were a singular contrast with my uncle's. Nevertheless, they soon came to understand each other. Neither looked at the amount of the payment, the one was ready to accept whatever was offered, the other was ready to give whatever was demanded. Never was bargain more readily concluded. The result of the treaty was, that Hans engaged on his part to conduct us to the village of Stapy, on the south shore of the Snaefell Peninsula, at the very foot of the volcano. By land this would be about 22 miles, to be done, said my uncle, in 2 days. But when he learnt that the Danish mile was 24,000 feet long, he was obliged to modify his calculations and allow 7 or 8 days for the march. Four horses were to be placed at our disposal, 2 to carry him and me, 2 for the baggage. Hams, as was his custom, would go on foot. He knew all that part of the coast perfectly, and promised to take us the shortest way. His engagement was not to terminate with our arrival at Stapy, he was to continue in my uncle's service for the whole period of his scientific researches, for the remuneration of 3 riksdales a week, about 12 shillings, but it was an express article of the covenant that his wages should be counted out to him every Saturday at 6 o'clock in the evening, which, according to him, was one indispensable part of the engagement. The start was fixed for the 16th of June. My uncle wanted to pay the hunter a portion in advance, but he refused with one word. After, said he. After, said the professor for my edification. The treaty concluded, Hans silently withdrew. A famous fellow, cried my uncle, but he little thinks of the marvelous part he has to play in the future. So he is to go with us as far as the center of the earth, Axel. 48 hours were left before our departure. To my great regret I had to employ them in preparations, for all our ingenuity was required to pack every article to the best advantage, instruments here, arms there, tools in this package, provisions in that, 4 sets of packages in all. The instruments were 1. An Eigel centigrade thermometer, graduated up to 150 degrees, 302 degrees far, which seemed to me too much or too little. 'Too much if the internal heat was to rise so high, for in this case we should be baked, not enough to measure the temperature of springs or any matter in a state of fusion. 2. An aneroid barometer, to indicate extreme pressures of the atmosphere. An ordinary barometer would not have answered the purpose, as the pressure would increase during our descent to a point which the mercurial barometer would not register. Three. A chronometer, made by Boissonnas, June, of Geneva, accurately set to the meridian of Hamburg. Four. 2 compasses, viz., a common compass and a dipping needle. 5. A night glass. 6. 2 of Ruhmkorff's apparatus, which, by means of an electric current, supplied a safe and handy portable light. The arms consisted of 2 of Purdy's rifles and 2 brace of pistols. But what did we want arms for? We had neither savages nor wild beasts to fear, I supposed. But my uncle seemed to believe in his arsenal as in his instruments, and more especially in a considerable quantity of gun cotton, which is unaffected by moisture, and the explosive force of which exceeds that of gunpowder. The tools comprised 2 pickaxes, 2 spades, a silk rope ladder, 3 iron-tipped sticks, a hatchet, a hammer, a dozen wedges and iron spikes, and a long knotted rope. Now this was a large load, for the ladder was 300 feet long. And there were provisions too. This was not a large parcel, but it was comforting to know that of essence of beef and biscuits there were 6 months' consumption. Spirits were the only liquid, and of water we took none, but we had flasks, and my uncle depended on springs from which to fill them. Whatever objections I hazarded as to their quality, temperature, and even absence, remained ineffectual. To complete the exact inventory of all our traveling accompaniments, I must not forget a pocket medicine chest, containing blunt scissors, splints for broken limbs, a piece of tape of unbleached linen, bandages and compresses, lint, a lancet for bleeding, all dreadful articles to take with one. Then there was a row of phials containing dextrin, alcoholic ether, liquid acetate of lead, vinegar, and ammonia drugs which afforded me no comfort. Finally, all the articles needful to supply Ruhmkorff's apparatus. My uncle did not forget a supply of tobacco, coarse-grained powder, and amadou, nor a leathern belt in which he carried a sufficient quantity of gold, silver, and paper money. Six pairs of boots and shoes, made waterproof with a composition of India rubber and naphtha, were packed amongst the tools. Clothed, shod, and equipped like this, said my uncle, there is no telling how far we may go. The 14th was wholly spent in arranging all our different articles. In the evening we dined with Baron Tramps, the mayor of Reykjavik, and Dr. Heil Talon, the first medical man of the place, being of the party. M. Fredrickson was not there. I learned afterwards that he and the governor disagreed upon some question of administration, and did not speak to each other. I therefore knew not a single word of all that was said at this semi-official dinner, but I could not help noticing that my uncle talked the whole time. On the 15th our preparations were all made. Our host gave the professor very great pleasure by presenting him with a map of Iceland far more complete than that of Henderson. It was the map of M. Olaf Nikolaus Olsen, in the proportion of 1 to 480,000 of the actual size of the island, and published by the Icelandic Literary Society. It was a precious document for a mineralogist. Our last evening was spent in intimate conversation with M. Fredrickson, with whom I felt the liveliest sympathy. Then, after the talk, succeeded, for me, at any rate, a disturbed and restless night. At 5 in the morning I was awoke by the neighing and pawing of 4 horses under my window. I dressed hastily and came down into the street. Hans was finishing our packing, almost as it were without moving a limb, and yet he did his work cleverly. My uncle made more noise than execution, and the guide seemed to pay very little attention to his energetic directions. At 6 o'clock our preparations were over. M. Fredrickson shook hands with us. My uncle thanked him heartily for his extreme kindness. I constructed a few fine Latin sentences to express my cordial farewell. Then we bestrode our steeds, and with his last adieu M. Fredrickson treated me to a line of Virgil eminently applicable to such uncertain wanderers as we were likely to be. Et quacumque viam dident fortuna sequamur. Terever fortune clears a way, thither our ready footsteps stray.